Since South Africa's President Jacob Zuma announced there'd be no increase in university fees for next year, a whole bunch of people have come up with a whole bunch of really clever ideas, some of them practical, some of them not so clever, about how funding models can be brought to bear. We spoke recently to the Higher Education Minister, Blade Nzimande. He's calling for a wealth tax, a graduate tax, an increase in the skills levy and prescribed assets. He wants more money to throw at the problem. Do we not just need to think about it a bit more smartly? Joining me to discuss how a tax might best work, if in fact that is the best way to go, is Busi Mdletshe, who is the Chief Executive of BTMT, and Zwelodumo Mabhoza, who's founder of Priority Tax Solutions. Is tax the way to go?
Tax is the way to go if you look at the other tax types, which is income taxes and expenditure taxes, which is VAT. But now talking of wealth taxes, we are looking at another leg because it means we are looking at the riches. Now the question is, should we go for the riches? They will ask themselves, what are we doing with the existing taxes?
No, exactly right. So, and also depends on who you say is rich. The Oppenheimers are rich. The Ruperts are rich. Most of their money's out of the country. How then, practically, do you tax the super rich who are global citizens?
It's a problem, Bruce, because the thing is there's an issue of manipulation because we are looking at issues of disclosure of the assets and the valuation of those assets. Now think about this. Do you think the riches will be able to tell us that my assets or my wealth has appreciated up to this much? Because they will be inviting the taxman.
Exactly.
So we have that.
So therefore it is not a practical solution.
We can say it's not viable at this stage.
I mean, Thomas Piketty admits as much in his book, Capital in the 21st Century. He goes, this is a great idea, a wealth tax, because why should the fourth generation of some clever person 150 years ago be sitting home idle, taking drugs and listening to music all day and not actually earning their money? Surely those people should be taxed. It's a fair enough argument. But how do you track the money? Because money is incredibly hard to track, is it not?
No, it is quite difficult, Bruce. You see, when I actually looked at the headlines, one of the things that I was thinking about is that we already have got estate duty, we already have got capital gains tax, and we already have got donations tax. They are all taxing wealth. And now we've got something called wealth tax, which essentially we've got all the three categories which are falling under wealth tax. It's quite interesting to actually see what is it that people are talking about. But I think it's going to be a challenge because what is happening is that people are actually asking for free education. Chances are, in all likelihood, by the time this tax, whatever the nature of tax that is going to come in is going to be, by the time this tax is introduced, they'll be working and they'll be paying that tax.
Precisely, and that's the point I made on this program the other day. Thank you for backing me up on it, because it's a case of be careful what you wish for, because you will be the person in the future to be funding what you're fighting for today. Idealistically and ideologically, they'll say, fine, because by then I'll be rich. Well, they haven't been paying tax before, and they don't. As you get older, what's the saying? If you're not a socialist in your 20s, you have no feelings, and if you're still a socialist when you're in your 40s, then you have no brain. Because people generally become more conservative as they gather assets and as they pay more tax, they expect to get a return on that investment. So, is raising more money then the solution? I get a sense that you don't think it is.
I think what is, for me, the best way to fund education is through efficiencies. I think that's the best price that we can have. I mean, if we can have efficiencies funding education, then there's a number of spin-offs that come out of that. One, by giving free education to these students, what you also say to them is to say, okay, fine, you can put something else and say, when you finish your studies, then you have to go and work for the government. If you go and work for the government, then you're not going to be worried about the shortage of doctors. We're not going to be worried about the shortage of accountants.
I feel like I'm looking in a mirror. I mean, you're a handsome guy. I feel like I'm looking in a mirror. I feel like I'm talking to myself here. It is this idea of what they call the Zuma year in the medical schools, where young people who have got medical degrees and have spent an awful long time at university with state subsidies give a year of their life. They go and get great work experience. They get paid a decent wage while they're doing it. And some of them go and get to live on the beach and do nice things as they give back in that. And exactly that. If you're a chartered accountant to get support from the state, well, then surely a year or two for SARS would be useful.
And what is even good about that is that all these qualified audits that we get from municipalities, now we've got people to go and sort out those problems. Yeah. And now, guess what? You can also have an architecture who can help us to do the right work in case we decide to build something. you know.
No, but exactly right. And the question then becomes a question of ideology, of course, because do municipalities really want somebody who understands the numbers coming in and telling them what they can and can't do, especially some whippersnapper fresh out of university? You then run into politics and that problem, don't you?
Yeah, but I think it's something that would appreciate over time, because I don't think they're happy when they always get these qualified audit reports, you know. So if they could work on that, you know, having people with the skill, that would actually improve their efficiencies. And also touching on efficiency, like Zweli has said, you know, when we tax the wealth or the riches, now the question is they'll be asking themselves that there is already tax, and then tax that is being collected, but it's not used efficiently. So if these departments could just maybe adhere to things like PFMA and make sure that there's no wasteful expenditures, make sure that there's no irregular expenses, you know, the litigations that we have currently in our country, you know, who funds all of those things? So efficiency is the key here.
I mean, there were several big insults hurled at the students when they went into the grounds of Parliament the other day. They were beaten back with batons and police with riot shields and stun grenades and that sort of stuff. But inside Parliament, here's the finance minister saying, well, there isn't any money for education, we'll have to look at that. But while we're about it, we'll give another 120 million rand or whatever it was to protecting politicians, and we'll give another 10% increment to the cost of civil servants. Now, if you cut the civil service, if you cut defence spending, because goodness knows why we spend so much money on defence, if you cut the wasteful expenditure, the 30 billion rand that the Auditor General was able to find, suddenly there's a pool of 50 or 60 billion rand
that could be available.
That could be available to do good things. You don't want to give everybody free education, though, do you?
Look, the reality is that there's nothing for free. Someone must pay.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are a number of options. One of the options is to say that currently we've got NSFAS. You can actually even expand NSFAS and make it to be a strong fund, with companies contributing to that and giving them an additional incentive. And that would go to their CSI, to go to their PE scorecard. And you also give them an additional tax deduction, like what they've done with research and development, where you say instead of deducting 100% of what you've contributed to this fund, you are going to deduct 1.5. In other words, 150% of that. You get that as a deduction, but the money goes into a pool. And from that pool, when you give that money to the students, it goes as a loan, okay? And if people do not want to pay back that money, then they go and work for the state.
Yeah.
Or if people, they get taken by the private sector, then because the private sector, they got a deduction, then they'll have to pay the money back to the state.
Yeah, but, and all of that makes more sense. But you've got Blade Zibande sitting, and he was on the show a night or two ago, saying, no, corporations are the biggest beneficiaries of graduates. So therefore, they need to pay more tax. And I went, hold on a second, the state's the biggest beneficiary, because you get clever people into corporations that make more money, who employ more people, who pay higher taxes. The state ultimately benefits from a highly skilled environment.
But you know, the other funny thing, Bruce, is how the economists look at this wealth tax. Like they would say, if, for example, you have a capital asset like land, if you have land and it's idling, you're not using it, you're not paying any taxes. But then they encourage the issue of efficiency, because then if you were to use that capital asset and then maybe like you cultivate on it, or you develop it, or you sell it to people that will use it productively, you can get away from wealth taxes, from holding that asset, but then you can just look into ordinary income taxes.
So it's a utilization tax
It's
rather
easy
than a
to-
wealth tax, effectively.
Yes.
So if you are a farmer who's sitting on, I don't know, 10,000 hectares of arable land in the Free State, and you're happy to leave it to pasture so you can have 3 zebras walking past a waterhole to keep you happy in your old age, it
So
needs to
you'll
be productive.
Yes, you'll be facing holding wealth tax.
How complicated is that, though? Because that seems like a very complicated thing to prove in an already quite complex tax system.
I think it would be a way of encouraging people to use their land, because currently we have people complaining that they don't have jobs, so there's an issue of unemployment. So that would help us in eradicating poverty, because getting people to work in those farms, it's also helping us in not having a lot of people being unemployed.
The best line out of the medium-term budget policy statement was, of course, that any piece of legislation in future will have a cost-benefit analysis attached to it. And that was a direct go at the Home Affairs Minister and the visa debacle. Are we seeing a government that is now, courtesy of Julius Malema and 40,000 of his closest friends, marching through to the Reserve Bank, the Chamber of Mines, and then into Sandton in a highly disciplined and ordered fashion, but enforce, the students with less discipline but certainly enforce on Parliament and on the union buildings, suddenly government's beginning to pay attention, really.
Look, I think we, as a country, we need to understand that things are actually changing, you know. The cost benefit, which is the point that you've just mentioned, I think that would be interesting if we say that any legislation that we try to implement, we need to look at the cost benefit. You can start with the tax legislation, because the majority of the provisions that you have there, when you go to SARS and you talk to people who are actually the implementers of the same legislation, they will tell you that we can't do A, B, and C because the system does not allow us to do that. Now, to get that done, you have to incur additional costs. It will be the same thing if you decide to introduce any additional tax. The easiest things would be to do things like increasing VAT.
Which is precisely what the Davis Commission is suggesting.
You know?
But you do that at the beginning of 2016, and something important is happening in 2016.
Elections.
Oh yes, elections. That's the thing. I knew there was something. And if there's one thing that everybody feels, it's VAT, which makes it a great tax.
Yeah, because
but
it's
it makes it
even
lousy
by the
politics.
Easy to collect, that's one thing. But at the same time, the problem that you have, even if you introduce a different kind of tax, business people, they are always going to push that to the ultimate consumer, because you've got shareholders, they want their return on investment. So the only way in which they get their return on investment is to actually say, maybe let's...
But you also wonder if government's learned from the e-tolls example, where it said, no, hold on a second, the user must pay, and there's a sound argument for all of that. And then suddenly somebody picked up on the lack of efficiency in the collection mechanism, and taxpayers just refused.
We need a turnaround strategy on improving efficiency.
Yeah, and so VAT, it's not going to be popular, but if they don't do it, we're going to be short of money.
I'm not even sure, Bruce, because now they've made it easier for the Minister of Finance now to sell increase in VAT by supporting the free education. And I've been talking to a number of people, they say, hey, this is the right thing. The students are doing the right thing. They must get free education. There's nothing like free education. It has to come from somewhere, you know. And the good part is that ultimately, those people, they'll be standing on the other side paying for free education for other people, you know.
It'll happen. It'll happen. That was a fabulous discussion with Busi Mdletshe, who's Chief Executive of BTMT, and Zwelodumo Mabhoza, the founder of Priority Tax Solutions. Creative ways of looking at complicated and taxing problems. On the MoneyMakers, more tomorrow. Till then, thank you for watching. Good night.